This will be one of many attempts to record the next recap about our face-to-face Edge of the Empire campaign. I'm glad people are interested in it, and I get messages from time to time, not only from viewers on the YouTube channel, but my own players asking when's the next recap going to be, and so that's nice. But there's been something about this recap which has made it almost impossible to film. It keeps getting interrupted and things like that. So maybe this one was successful. We'll see. Going back to the last recap, the group had a moment's rest. They had been trying very hard to string together this very complicated plan, which could, help their future financial stability and also help this community of outcasts far, far out in wild space retain their independence should someday the Empire ever come knocking, or someone or something else. But it wasn't easy, and while they were trying to nail this down in the core, where their reputations and various obligations make life particularly difficult for them, they kept getting more and more attention and more groups, some willing to work together, some working at cross purposes, were increasing the heat. And so the last session ended with them breaking away from all of that, striking a few good blows, and just trying to catch their breath for a moment before arcing right back into the fire to do their best to take out one faction that they felt absolutely had to go. A faction run by an absolute lunatic, a certifiable madman who had delusions of transferring his own consciousness into electronic brains, multiples of them, and spearheading a very slow, gradual, and insidious assassination program using, droids disguised as protocol droids or labor droids or whatever, but that had these hidden capabilities of poisoning those near them. It was a plan that he had tried to do many years before, working for the Empire, and his escape from the clutches of the Empire at that time made him kind of a sympathetic figure to the nascent Rebel Alliance, and then later on to the fugitives that they had met out in wild space. He had tricked people for a very long time, but his madness grew and grew and grew, and of course his droid designs have influenced a lot of different story threads that we've had in the campaign over the years, including him being the designer, perhaps the actual maker, of our PC droid T3, or /. And she desperately sought him for much of the campaign, and of course now that they've discovered who and what he is, and the fact that he's been reclaiming pieces like some kind of body snatcher, reclaiming pieces from all the different droid designs that he's been involved in over the years and reassembling them into different types of droids, some very mismatched and strange seeming, and others these sleek and brutal designs designed for combat or for protection or for stealthy assassination. The whole group has earned a bunch of reasons why they want to take this character down, not the least of which is that he seems to be somehow tied up into the backstory of the missing bounty hunter droid character, HK-85M. And in fact, they've learned that there's some significance to that model number 85M, and that possibly other droids that they meet may be tied up with this maker somehow. Now, their ally, their friend, HK-85M, has vanished. He vanished during an altercation with the Maker's forces, droid forces. They've been trying to seek him out, and they're going to go head on against the Maker. They figured out where he has to go if his obsession with transferring his experience and possibly consciousness into a droid brain is going to happen. It's going to happen on a nearby world, which is famed for its production of large-scale droid brains. so they figure out which factory it might be, and they operate stealthily. They send Moss, the Bothan almost spy, in to sort things out, and before they know it, they're involved in yet another high action, high octane fight, reposition. They've got assassin droids moving against them. They've got assault droids moving against them. They've got human and other species hostages to protect and free. The entire droid brain factory has been taken over by the forces of the Maker, and they've got to get in, and they have to try to prevent the download of his consciousness into this massive construct. Were they successful? Well, they still don't know. With the way that their lives run, they pretty much assume that he's still out there somewhere. And the actual living Maker is still in prison in the colony out in wild space. That's another thing that needs to be dealt with. But getting to this confrontation, this kind of showdown with the Maker's forces to get some peace, some respite from this particular ongoing thread in the campaign, that wasn't as easy as they expected. They thought they could simply board the Archon, board the Monarch, their 2 ships, and make their way to Galarin. But such was not to happen, because as they're making the decision, as they're planning things out, they're all sitting in the lounge of the Archon, and our NPC cast is quite large now, so you can imagine that Captain Paul Hywan's motivation of keeping a crew together like a family and binding them together with work and duty and obligation and whatnot was really feeling some fulfillment. And then they receive a message from the Monarch, and there's just a skeleton crew over there, but they receive a message saying that someone has boarded, and he's looking for Henry, our Force user. And Henry and Delil, his kind of mentor character, they both feel this chill presence in the Force, and they recognize that this threat is coming to them from the dark side of the Force. Well, they don't want to risk anyone else's lives, and Henry's kind of gung-ho to test his mettle against a fallen Force user, and of course they want to rescue the hostages. So the 2 Force sensitives, PC and NPC, they rush toward the Monarch, the rest of the group following along with them. And it's a good thing they did, because this particular threat was like a spider in a web. She had made sure that every advantage was on her side. She was a demolitions expert, and she had rigged the ship's entrance points to blow, and she had put the hostages scattered around in the different rooms and cargo bays of the freighter, and she had positioned herself in a choke point in the hallway where she would be able to see everyone coming at her, but no one could get at her from behind unless they cut their way through the ship, which would be noticeable. So she's ready. She's physically no match for the 2 of them, maybe not even one of them singly, but yet she keeps stacking the odds in her favor, and she's all about the challenge, and she's just champing at the bit. She can't wait till they get in to fight her physically, and I'm trying to portray that in a coffee shop in downtown Daejeon at 11 o'clock in the morning, which was an interesting challenge. Everything that you could possibly imagine would be its opposite. We're sitting in bright light listening to very goofy music, like an actual kind of lounge version of something like 99 Red Balloons. And yet I'm trying to portray the chill and the absolute dedication of this character in pure darkness. And she has a light saber pike, and as she's brandishing it, sparks are flying in the darkness. I don't know if that came out across or not, but the group treated her like a threat, and And the monarch was pretty much destroyed in the process of freeing the hostages. All the hostages were saved. The dark force user was captured, interrogated, and some clues about her whereabouts were gained before they recognized that they needed to put her down, but not without liberating her lightsaber pike and discovering a holocron that spoke to them very persuasively and is still having ongoing effects today. But this was months ago. So they have their first battle with an enemy force sensitive. They have the first appearance of lightsabers in combat. The NPC Dalil brandishing a weapon he doesn't feel comfortable with and doesn't truly like. And then they go head to head with the Maker, and they come out successful but hot. The Empire is hot on the trail, and they light out of there, heading back for the Outer Rim, and they take their time. Once they get back out to the Outer Rim, they return to this colony, Haven Colony, and they reestablish contact. They find out if the Maker is still in custody, and if the people that they have shepherded there are still getting along well, and they are. They're enjoying the opportunity to live there, and they're thriving. But Haven is not without its problems, and one of these problems is that people are disappearing, and the ruling council believes it's a bounty hunter. So the group finds themselves on the other side of this, and in order to restock the Archon and get some repairs done, they find themselves obligated to track down this bounty hunter and put a stop to this threat, which they're quite happy to do because it's taking them back in a direction that they wanted to explore anyway. Now, long, long ago, there was a time when they discovered kind of a hidey hole or a waypoint out in wild space for what was obviously a bounty hunter. And their bounty hunter, who was with them at the time, HK-85M, had, for whatever reason, destroyed that camp. Well, of course, they discover that these two things are aligned, and this bounty hunter kind of holds a grudge. He makes them feel quite small and threatened for a while, but at the same time treats them with hospitality, treats them to a wonderful dinner. And then they notice that there's way too much going on this planet to be just this small crew of bounty hunters. And they recognize that the bounties that he's been capturing, he's been using as slave labor, and they're not really all that thrilled with that, but they don't really know if there's anything they can do about it. And there's these moral choices that keep hitting them. Are they going to free the slaves? Are they going to go against the bounty hunters guild to free these people? And he's putting forward the argument that, well, they're not really slaves. They're prisoners. They need to eat. We don't have enough supplies. If they want to eat, they need to farm, so we make it possible for them to farm, and they have a nice lifestyle here, which will be much nicer than whatever it is that they go back to. Some of them are wanted dead or alive, and will probably wind up dead, and most of them will wind up in prison, and blah, 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 and isn't this better? And how can you want to interfere? And, well, that argument was persuasive for some of them and not worth pushing for others. But what they really wanted to secure was that the bounty hunter would no longer be sneaking in to Haven and stealing people. And they were successful in doing this, but to do so they had to betray a friend. And this was a little hard for me to watch. I really didn't think that they would do it. I really didn't think that they would sell Waylon, their cowardly little contact that had helped them get involved in the biggest heist of their life. I didn't really think that they would give him up, but they did. It's interesting. It bothered our Force sensitives. It kind of bothered our captain, but at the same time, he kind of felt like you roll your dice and you take your chances. And Waylon's a wanted man, and if we can save the many by sacrificing the one, then maybe that's okay. There was some talk about maybe rescuing Waylon in the future, but... So, after having dealt with the threat of the bounty hunter, they come back, they regroup, they resupply, they repair the Archon, and they start discussing what's going to happen next. But what they discover is that one of their shipments, one of the one of the many pieces of this very complicated plan to smuggle planetary scale turbo laser batteries in pieces out of the core and to this colony. Well, one of those ships has gone missing, hasn't made the rendezvous point. It's a captain that everybody can trust, so they know that she, a Wookiee, hasn't absconded with the mostly useless pieces that make the actual turret for the turbo lasers. There's no weapon there, and it's not complete parts. And everything's disassembled, so no one would really be able to figure out what the parts are without a lot of work. It's not likely that she stole them. It's very likely that she was attacked by pirates or tracked down by the Empire. So, highly motivated, our group goes to seek this out. And they do their normal cautious approach. They invest time and energy in looking for rumors. If someone were to have taken out this huge freighter from this particular crew, who would they need to have hired? Or was that crew hired at that time? And they put the puzzle pieces together. I was really impressed, actually. And they discovered that a mercenary company with whom that they have competed for contracts before was the one that probably took this ship out. It wasn't the Empire, but who hired them. They couldn't figure out who had hired them, which made them very suspicious that it was probably Imperial intelligence laying a trap. Well, regardless, they need to get this shipment. Not so much worried about getting the ship back, but they absolutely have to get the shipment back, or they're destitute and maybe financially unable to recover. Well, they find that some of the Wookiees have been turned over to a bounty hunter's office. Bounties are on the heads of these Wookiees for some reason, but they're likely going to be heading into slavery. Well, they've had enough talk about slavery. They've had enough talk with bounty hunters. They decide to break the captain and the first mate, both Wookiees, out of prison, or at least out of the holding cell for the bounty hunters. And this is a cell that they're very familiar with, having broken into it before when it was the temporary Imperial prison on Vev Station many, many sessions ago, available in one of the earlier recaps. So the bounty hunters have moved in and taken over the entire floor that used to be run by the Empire when it was responsible for law and order in this sector. But now that the CSA has taken over, things are very, very different. So they mean to go in stealthily. They mean to use diplomacy and get these two captives free. But it doesn't turn out that way. Henry's recognized for his bounty and leads a bunch on a merry chase through the station. Captain Highwind is recognized. Moss sneaks in, frees the hostages, gets them undercover, and smuggles them out without anyone being the wiser. But still, we manage to shoot up the entire bounty hunter office and be identified doing it. And so we've earned a certain amount of enmity from the Bounty Hunters Guild, which has caused no end of problems since. But they do escape with the Wookiees and discover that the Wookiees aren't that interested in talking to them. Apparently their reputation as bad people precedes them. And while the Wookiees are grateful for having been freed, they don't want to associate with them further in any plan to rescue the vessel. So they drop the two off, wish them well, and continue their investigation. How can they find the shipment? Well, this leads them into pirate channels, basically. They discover that if you're going to move a large ship like this, there's only a few places where it can be done successfully without too much interference from the Empire. And they, of course, stumble across a sail that has to be the captured freighter. And it's coming complete with cargo. So, of course, in huge blazing letters, they're saying, "Trap, trap, trap," all over this. But because of obligation, because of duty, because of pride, they absolutely have to get this back. Don't forget money. They have to get the cargo back. And there's a part of Captain Paul Highwind that really wants to see Agent Crescent again in this kind of star-crossed lover's story that is the heart of his obligation. The Imperial intelligence agent that very much wants him dead, but he doesn't quite believe it. And he thinks if he can just make eye contact in the right way, maybe things will be different. She's the one that got away, the one that maybe one day. Meanwhile, she's doing everything she can to make sure that he spends either the rest of his life in prison or that the rest of his life is just seconds long. So, choice is yours on what the truth of all of that is. So, they track down this freighter sail, and they recognize they're going to have to travel for a few weeks to get out there. And all of this uncovers a lot of uncomfortable stuff. They had encountered some very famous pirates almost a year before. This ship was passing through their hands, and they were known to steal and re-steal ships like this. The Merc Company, were they going to be around? Was Imperial intelligence going to be setting a trap? Lots of things to be stressed about, not the least of which, they don't have the money to auction off the ship, meaning they're going to have to steal it or find a patron or do something, all while dealing with this trap. So they track down where they need to go, and they head there. They have 2 ships again, and this is kind of interesting. The second ship was picked up by Henry and the first Force user that they had met, Gaumon. And the 2 of them needed to go on a quest. Gaumon had been dreaming about it since before he had met the PC crew, and Henry had been dreaming about it since he had found Haven. The Force was moving within him, and he was recognizing strong ties to a mystical tradition that was firmly represented in the way that the Force is talked about at Haven. So, both men felt compelled to build lightsabers. So as all the different members of the crew are making their way to where this auction is going to be, our 2 Force sensitives begin tracking down the sensations and tracking down the threads in their dreams. It's not easy. They go to places where they think they might be able to find lightsaber components. They go back to Vev Prime, where there was known to be large collections of Jedi artifacts. And when they get there, of course, they discover that the Jedi Temple that Henry had fought a duel in the year before, completely gone, wiped clean, the top of the mountain sliced. But they do find some of the parts that they're looking for in the black market. Then they recognize that the dreams that Gaumon have been pulling him back to the prison planet. Somewhere on this planet will be the crystals that he needs to construct his lightsaber. Henry also feels this pull, but at the same time, he's had an opportunity to take a Krayt Dragon Pearl, which was given to Captain Highwind by Jabba many, many moons ago. He had the opportunity to use it. There was some friction between him and Highwind about actually using it, not just it being an offer, but eventually the 2 worked it out. And he did his best to follow his instincts, follow the pull of his visions, and assemble the weapon. And he succeeded. In fact, as we played through this session, we conducted it as a solo session. As the player and I conducted the session, it was like the dice were responding to what we hoped would happen. It was becoming obvious the way the player was playing the character that his path to the Force was an inward one. Right? He'd started with sense and move, and had been self-taught for so long, and encountering these visions and whatnot, and even when he found mentors, he still would retreat into himself and evaluate, is this, what I want to do? And whenever he felt confronted by the dark side, he would pause and fight those emotions down and find that inner peace again, and not yield to the easy temptation of the dark side of the Force. The dice gave us perfect successes against an incredibly challenging way to build a lightsaber. It was like it was destined. It was a moving experience, actually. So after we had this kind of mystical experience as players of the game, we continued with this vision quest, and we played through the NPC's side of the quest, going back to the incredibly deadly prison planet and the tremendously dangerous fauna and environment that is there. And he also succeeded in getting the crystals, although he had a significantly harder struggle in actually building and constructing the lightsaber. It took him a very long time to put it together, but when he finally did, once again, it matched his personality, which was an interesting experience. These lightsabers haven't really been used yet, but it's coming. So what happened next? The group reassembles. They get together on this mainly agrarian world, which is known for its mix of heavy industry and farming. It's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally in the middle of nowhere. Not in hut space, not really in an interesting part of the Empire. It's pretty far away from very much of everything, and yet, for some reason, the Empire has plopped 3 large factories there to build TIE fighters. TIE fighters, TIE bombers, and the TIE Punisher, otherwise known as the TIE Aggressor, a superior version of the bomber. Production is starting here now. The Empire is taking an interest in the local government here now, and yet there are no Star Destroyers in orbit. They're just garrisons on the ground, and it doesn't seem like anybody's looking for Captain Hywen. It doesn't really seem like it's a trap, and yet, trap! It has to be a trap! So, to cover the expenses of getting there, Hywind and Moss called in some contacts known to move in circles frequented by the Rebel Alliance, and they found some people who wanted to travel in that direction, a political agitator and 2 soldiers. The soldiers were assigned to figure out what was going on the planet. The agitator was, of course, there to foment seeds of rebellion. And while they're traveling, there's much talk about the rebellion. Now, Hywind is one of those characters who is pulled in multiple directions. He, of course, is primarily fueled by his obligations and motivations, but over the course of the 2 years of play, he's also earned a sense of duty to the Rebel Alliance. And more these days, particularly because during this time period, I was filling them in about the details of the Battle of Hoth. They were seeing all the Imperial propaganda about Hoth. He was wondering, what should he be doing with his time? Once they get on the planet and they start seeing the effect of this growing Imperial presence, they are reminded of what it was like in their adopted home system, where Vev and Vev Prime and the Vev Station are, what it was like when the Empire came in and made changes, and how freeing it felt when the Empire was replaced, even though it was replaced by the greed of the CSA. Talk tends toward the political, but they dive into the underworld and they're trying to figure out a way to, hide their friends from the Rebel Alliance and get them safely ensconced in the local underworld, and figure out if they can get any foreknowledge about this trap. They also need to build a crew large enough to pilot this giant freighter if they're able to steal it, buy it, or whatever. And they're, like I said, desperate to get any hint of Imperial intelligence. And now we're pretty much up to date. Our last session was yesterday, and the group was getting ready to move on the governor, the planetary governor, who has a very interesting last name. He goes by the name of Kenobi, and this is us taking another step into our own take on canon. I'm not really interested in any EU ideas of where Obi-Wan Kenobi came from, but I'm going with the idea that he had to come from somewhere, and maybe he came from here, or maybe he fought a battle during the Clone Wars here, which was of significant importance, and maybe some members of his family are spacefarers or whatever, but the group has identified that this Kenobi is related to that Kenobi, and while they don't know anything at all about that Kenobi, as players, they're kind of excited about it. They've had upgrades done to their ship so it has more firepower. They have had run-ins with pirates, which have them a little nervous because the pirates seem to be paying attention to them because they're just that famous, and their ship is becoming interesting, and these pirates like to steal interesting ships. Henry, who is a former stormtrooper, has realized that one of these pirates is like a boogeyman he was told about in basic training, known as the Skinner, of an outlaw character known to kill and skin his enemies, particularly if they were Imperial. And the story goes so far in some places say that he actually wears the skin in tanned hides, making his clothing from them. Is this true? Untrue? Who knows? But it's a great story, and the pirates certainly aren't saying it's not true. Well, in our last session, the group was, like I said, going to deal with this governor, Governor Kenobi, and they were going to get on his good side. And they came up with a very convoluted plan that actually went off without a hitch to cause a disruption during the dismantlement of a monument to General Kenobi. TIE fighters flew over, the monument was destroyed. This is all part of the Imperial display, but from there, their local allies set off paint bombs and stun grenades and laser blaster bolts through the crowd to make it seem like something had gone wrong. The Empire was actually bombing the town square where the monument was. And this went with great effect, and they were able to connect with one of the governor's aides and try to ingratiate themselves into his circles, because they know there's no way this governor wants the Empire on his planet. There has to be something that's forcing him into this position, and maybe if they can help him in some way, he can help them out, learn something about the Empire. They can fill in their underworld connections and help them, harden their defenses against whatever it is the Empire's doing on this world. And maybe, just maybe, get help reclaiming their shipment. Well, I mentioned local allies a few minutes ago, and this was a fun session, actually. While they're moving around the city and getting the lay of the land and making contact, well, people have been watching them. And they're noteworthy. They're carrying stacks and stacks of obligation. They stand out, and the underworld is talking about them. And when they have altercations with stormtroopers, they come out looking really good, and the stormtroopers wind up heading to the hospital or the morgue. And so a local street gang of kids has been eyeing their tech and eyeing their moves and following them around. And they've been, aware that someone is following them, but not quite sure who. Finally, Henry gets a read on them. He senses that something's about to happen. What? He doesn't know, but he gets everybody outside, and they're ambushed. But the ambush is transparent. The group is totally prepared to deal with this group of street kids ranging in ages from 10 to 16. And some of the kids are really cool, and one of the kids, Henry realizes, is Force sensitive. And this takes them into a darker chapter of this planet's history, because something like the Inquisition, we're not using the Inquisition as presented in the books. We're using something that we've worked together ourselves that is more in tune with the the canon that we've built ourselves. But from time to time on this planet, people disappear, and some of these kids are homeless for that reason. Inquisitors, for want of a better word, have taken their parents or taken the people that were their guardians, and nothing has ever been heard from them since. Our Force Sensitives offer this young street person the opportunity to learn. She plays it cool. She'll help them with their distraction in the town square. The next day she'll be their local contact, but she wants off this planet, and she wants them to transport her entire homeless group of street kids off the planet. The group agrees. They've all been there. So, one last thread to tell. While all of this chaos is going on, while Moss and Highwind are ingratiating themselves with the governor's aid, while Henry is helping cause the distraction, while the NPC Force user Gammon is sneaking into the local city hall to get structural plans for important buildings, while all of this stuff is going on, our little droid Backslash has been eyeing the governor's aide's protocol droid, because she recognizes something in him that has the stamp of the maker. She recognizes the green tint to the eye color. She recognizes the lines, the smooth lines, and she knows that something is up. So she tries to separate that protocol droid from the pack, but of course she can't get through all the rings of security until chaos erupts, and until after the droid has poisoned the governor's aide. A move designed to cause political instability and allow the Empire to step in and completely clamp down, putting martial law into this planet. No one will believe that this droid or poison would be the tool of the Empire. They work differently, and yet the group ascertains through the communication between Backslash and the protocol droid that he was a gift to the governor and his aide by an Imperial intelligence agent, one Agent Crescent. That gets us up to date. The way that the campaign has been run over the last few years has been fairly consistent. Kind of a casual edge to it because of the environment in which we play. The coffee shop doesn't allow for some of the things that I would normally do if we were playing in a living room or a space over which we had more control. But at the same time, we've managed to bond together as a group of players, and the characters have really come to life. And so there are times when the coffee shop fades away, and there are hints of that galaxy far, far away. Our understanding of how the game works has grown over the 2 years, and while we have incorporated elements from Age of Rebellion, and while we've played a few missions for Age of Rebellion, while we've incorporated some things from the Force and Destiny beta, and then from Force and Destiny once it was released, it really is an Edge of the Empire campaign, and it's run from those points of view. How the game itself is actually run is to treat it like we are telling episodic television in the Star Wars universe. So this means that there's very frequent use of coincidental timing and coincidental relationships between new characters that are introduced, or characters from the films. Like, they may come across a surly mechanic on some world and make some kind of deal with them, and many sessions later, or many months later of real time, discover that his last name was Solo. Is he related? Is he not related? They don't know, but this kind of thing. So Star Wars, we feel, is heavily dependent on a certain type of coincidence, and so one that we use frequently when we're playing the game is this coincidental timing, arriving at just the right time or just the wrong time, and coincidental relationships. The driving force always are the character's obligations and motivations. There are no campaign threads that exist that are not tied into the character's obligations, and there's no story thread that exists now that is not filtered through my perception and their perception of their motivations. So the characters, as a result, have become very, very strong. We know who they are. We know how they relate to the Star Wars universe. We know how it relates to them. We know what to expect when we go places as a result of who these characters are. It's very helpful and sometimes very powerful. I make very, very infrequent use of cutscenes. Now, my past with Star Wars has been to use them a lot. I always find out something that's going on aboard a Star Destroyer or something. I've only done this a handful of times over the 2 years. And part of that is that the group's never really sure what to make of them. It's kind of a technique that throws them a little bit. But at the same time, there seems to be a lot of enjoyment of them. And so I want to keep them special and have them be relevant. And maybe 10 or 15 sessions from now, they'll go, aha, that's what that cutscene was getting at. Sometimes they're a little more obvious. Sometimes, instead of doing a cutscene where we show something outside of the direct experience of the characters, I will send an email to one or more characters. Maybe it's a vision brought on by the Force power for C, or maybe it's a bunch of rumors that the character would have collected during a period of time on a space station or in a bazaar or something that we glossed over. A couple of days pass, and so I send email about things that they would have overheard, and sometimes our characters actually engage in spying and information collection. And so again, I present that material to them in email so it's easier to remember and track. So these are things that happen infrequently, but at the same time regularly in the campaign. To make it feel like an ongoing campaign, we have, of course, recurring characters, and we have the reference to old threads. Characters are reminded of things, or things look similar to things, and as a way of describing them, I describe them in terms of events or places or people that we've met before. Things like Jedi temples, or people dropping the names of NPCs or PCs that we've met before. The sense that Agent Crescent is closing in has been something that's been going on from very, very early days. Can we trust or deal with the bounty hunters even when they're in our own group? This has been a recurring theme that pops up from time to time. So that's how the game has been shaped. If we were doing Age of Rebellion, all of this would be very, very different. The way that the game runs. Age of Rebellion is a different game. What's cool about it is it uses the same mechanics. And so the duty of the characters, being assigned missions, being pushed and pulled in different directions, would have been conducted very differently. And likewise, if this were a Force and Destiny game, very, very different would this game be. So we have a lot of growth left, even after 2 years of play, even though we're running the same characters for 2 years and seeing them grow and amass experience and develop new abilities. There is so much more life left in this campaign, so many more directions to go, so many more threats to face, fear, and overcome. It's impressive. And the fact that we will be able to, if this campaign reaches some kind of end, the fact that we'll be able to jump into Age of Rebellion or Force and Destiny and find the experience to be completely different, that's a gift. All right. This has been a very long recap, and some of it may be quite vague. I'm open to talking about it. Leave comments or whatever, and maybe I can clear up some of the mysteries or drop details. And of course, for the players that are watching, if I've got things strangely out of order or whatnot, sorry.